20-year-old Kelly Berg Dove lived with her 4-year-old daughter in Bridgewater, Virginia. She was a popular young woman. Not a single soul in all of Bridgewater seemed to have a bad word to say about her, least of all her loving husband, who she'd been romantically involved with since they were both high school sophomores. She also made a point of keeping in touch with her mother and sisters almost every single day. All in all, Kelly was about as wholesome as a person as you've ever likely to find, and even found the time to work night shifts at a local gas station to help support her family. They weren't exactly strapped for cash, but Kelly valued the idea of making a contribution that would allow them a taste of the finer things in life, as well as squirreling a little of her paycheck away each month for her daughter's college fund. But sometimes terrible things happen to the most wonderful of people, and on the night of June 18th, 1982, something was about to happen in the sleepy town of Bridgewater that would send shockwaves through the close-knit community. In the night in question, Kelly was working her usual night shift at Harrisonburg's Imperial gas station on South Main Street, Route 11. Kelly had gotten the job because her 3 sisters had either worked there in the past or were still currently employed by Imperial. The employer thought that it would make the girls more accountable for their work, and he was right. Whenever one was sick or couldn't come into work, another would always take her place. And on this night in particular, Kelly was covering for one of her sisters for a little extra college money for her young daughter. Kelly's mom, Rachel, was also a very loving and attentive person, and would often call the gas station whenever one of her daughters was working to check if they needed any food or hot coffee brought over to help them through their shift. When Rachel spoke to Kelly that night, nothing seemed to be amiss. To her, it was just another average night at a mostly quiet gas station in rural Virginia. But little did she know, this would be the last time she would ever talk to her daughter, as the evening's events were about to take a rather dark and terrifying turn. At around 2:30 in the morning, long after Kelly's mom had retired to bed, Kelly apparently called the Harrisonburg police. The call was to inform them that she had been aggressively harassed by a guy that she described as improperly dressed. It seems Kelly was far too polite to describe what this male customer actually did in any kind of detail, but it's safe to assume that the implied meaning was that he had exposed himself to her. Just a few minutes after this first call, Kelly called again, this time pleading with the dispatcher for a patrol unit to be sent to the gas station. The same man that apparently exposed himself was calling the station to make obscene threats, and it seems that Kelly was growing anxious as she believed he was willing to follow through with them. The dispatcher promised to get a unit out to her as soon as possible, and that she should hang tight. However, just moments after the second call ended, Kelly dialed 911 yet again, only this time she was in a complete panic. With a voice that was dripping with fear, she demanded to know how far away the responding officers were, as the same deranged customer had apparently returned and was sitting in a silver or gray Ford that was parked in the gas station's parking lot. The last thing the 911 dispatcher heard was Kelly screaming that the man had just gotten out of the vehicle and was heading towards the gas station's main building. She then slammed the phone down, apparently preparing to defend herself. The cops rushed over to the Imperial gas station, expecting to arrive to a violent assault in progress. But to their bemusement, when they arrived at the gas station, the place was as quiet as the grave. They searched the entire site, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. All that remained was her purse. There were no signs of any kind of violent struggle, no indications that the store had been robbed. But there were also no clues as to where Kelly was. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. What's clear is that if the suspect was armed, he could have forced Kelly into his vehicle in just a matter of seconds. Kelly's family believed this to be the case, as they insisted that any attempt by an unarmed man to grab her and shove her into their vehicle would have resulted in Kelly fighting back vigorously. The police investigation that followed led officers to a nearby convenience store, where a clerk informed them that he had been visited by a man driving a gray vehicle about a half hour before Kelly's disappearance. The clerk told him that the man was aged between 20 to 25 years old and had blonde shoulder-length hair. This might seem like an obvious lead, but the cops were unable to track down this man, so no connection between him and Kelly's apparent abduction could ever be made. The police then interviewed Kelly's 3 sisters, who were also employed by the gas station. They were shocked to hear that the obscene kind of phone calls that Kelly had received that night were commonplace, but that no one had ever acted on them, believing them to be from some harmless old pervert whose bark was louder than his bite, so to speak. They also didn't entirely believe that the man that had harassed Kelly that night was the same person making the phone calls, as there didn't seem to be anything overly threatening about the lewd calls, while the driver of the silver or gray Ford was obviously aggressive enough to show up to the gas station in person. Yet after news hit that one of the gas station girls had apparently been abducted, the phone calls seemed to stop entirely for a while, only resuming around 6 weeks later when this apparently harmless old perv called and made lewd comments to one of the gas station's new hires. This could well be because whoever was making the calls simply wasn't involved in the abduction and didn't want to implicate themselves as a suspect in such a violent and disturbing crime. But it also could be because the same person who made the calls was satisfied with abducting Kelly and didn't feel the need to make another call, not until the same hunger resurfaced in them around a month and a half after the fact. When local media outlets contacted Kelly's parents regarding their daughter's disappearance, they gave a rather shocking answer to some very probing questions. When asked if they had any idea who might have kidnapped or harmed their daughter, and if this person might be a member of the local community, Kelly's parents unequivocally answered in the affirmative. Although the police had asked them not to publicly speak the man's name, they believed her abductor had been someone Kelly had gone to high school with, someone who had a long history of indecent exposure and making obscene telephone calls, and according to Kelly's sister, also drove a silvery gray Ford. But surely if Kelly had known the man personally, even just by association, she would have named him on one of the 3 911 calls she made leading up to her abduction. But it's also very possible that this person had either obscured their face somehow, or Kelly had simply not recognized him given that they had both graduated some time ago. There's also the possibility that Kelly was so terrified that she just failed to mention the man by name during one of the calls. Either way, the police obviously found the possibility of this man being the culprit so plausible that they asked Kelly's parents not to use his name publicly. Yet despite this, he was never charged with any crime, as there was simply not enough evidence to attempt any kind of conviction. There were several other suspects in the case, and authorities were sure to question all of them. But at a time when CCTV cameras and DNA evidence were still just technological pipe dreams, actually placing a suspect at the scene that night was all but impossible. For all intents and purposes, the person who showed up at the Imperial gas station that night was a ghost, someone who showed up, bundled Kelly Berg Dove into a vehicle, and then seemingly vanished themselves. Barely a trace of either of them was left behind, merely a purse and a vehicle description, far too little for the cops to go on to secure a suspect, Kelly, or her body. Almost 40 years later, what happened that night remains almost a total mystery, with Kelly being declared legally deceased by local authorities. Despite her family pouring money into private investigators to try to find out exactly what happened, they're no closer to getting any solid answers as they were almost 4 decades ago. The only truth we have of that night is the terrifying reality that Kelly went to work that night, not suspecting a thing, and ended up encountering someone that caused her to vanish from the face of the earth. And that, horrifyingly enough, is something that could happen to each and every one of us.
One day like any other, I was sitting in my room doing whatever when I got a notification from Instagram that I got a new follower. It seemed to be one of those random spam-like accounts. The username was Ty13053, and there were 5 pictures on the profile, all of different typical suburban houses. The profile had 2 followers, was following 3 people including me, and none of the pictures had any likes. Comments seemed to be disabled on all of the pictures. I didn't bother blocking or removing the account from my followers, as I had my profile set to public anyway at the time. A couple nights later, I got a notification that the random Thai13053 account liked my most recent picture. Just being curious, I click on the notification and then pull up the profile again. This time there was a new picture on the profile, and I instantly recognized it as a picture of my house. I DM'd the profile asking who it was, saying it was very funny. Of course, it had to be one of my friends messing with me. When the person running the account left my DMs unseen and didn't reply, I followed up with, "This is harassment and a threat," and that I would have the police follow up on this. I ran to my parents' room to wake them up, as it was past 12 at that point. I showed them the picture of our house, and said someone was messing with me who knew where we lived. They tried to rationalize, and said the same thing I thought, that it was someone from my school messing with me. My dad and I both went outside regardless to have a look around the property and on the street. It was a ghost town out there though, as it should be past 12 o'clock. We went back inside into our respective bedrooms. I wasn't actually going to pursue it with the police at that exact moment. It was obvious to me, at least in the moment, that someone who knew me was pranking me. I stayed up for a few more hours, and around the time I was about to go to bed, I got a DM from the account. It was an image, another image of my house. It was on the side this time. As I had the chat opened, he sent another, this time a picture of my window, with the glare from the TV in my room visible in the picture. I didn't dare get up and look out the window. Wouldn't you guess it, the next DM from the account was, "Look out your window." I turned off the TV to allow total darkness in the room. I didn't want to be seen by whoever was at my window. I quietly crawled off my bed onto the floor in the dark. As I was crawling on the carpet towards the door, a pounding on the window started. I don't want to say knocking, because these bangs on the glass sounded loud enough to shatter it. Inevitably, I turned, and of course, saw a person at the window. Facial features, though, impossible to make out. I got up and ran out of my room and to my parents' room once again. I pulled my dad out of the bed and led him to my room. He heard the end of the bangs on my window, but by the time we got to my room, the guy at the window was gone. The banging was all my dad needed to believe me and take this seriously, though. We called the cops that second and talked to the officers who came. They said the good news was since the person was contacting me through Instagram, they could track the person after putting a legal request into Instagram. So that same night, we followed the cop car to the nearest precinct, where we went through this long process. They took the account name and my details of the story, and literally the next day, we found out who it was. It was this kid named Luke who went to my high school. As much as I want to give the last name, that could lead to issues. Luke was a very, very weird kid that didn't talk to many people. He was just a very mean, unpleasant, and scary dude. Not scary like tough. Scary like some would even fear he'd do something crazy that would harm students or staff. I don't know why he targeted me. I never even spoke to the kid. But this really proved how dangerous he was. He hit my window so hard we found small cracks on it in the daylight. He was arrested, and we got him for a harassment charge, an attempted breaking and entering charge, and I think a couple others. One day in calculus class, my friend Joe and I were goofing off in the corner when someone on Instagram requested to follow me. It was some blonde girl named Tracy. I accepted her follow request and showed Joe, because based on her picture, she was pretty hot. Of course, I felt pretty good having what I assumed to be some random good-looking girl following me. I requested to follow her back, and then I put my phone down to take notes in class. It wasn't until I got home that I got a DM from the girl. I don't really want to relay our whole conversation. I'll just tell you it started with her calling me very attractive, asking some basic questions about me, etc. I told her to accept my follow request, but she said she didn't want her boyfriend to see any new followers because he checks that all the time. That's when it got exciting for me, having a girl show interest in me while she has a boyfriend. It might have been wrong of me, but I kept entertaining it. She said they kept fighting and she just needed a short break from hanging with him, that she wanted to hang out with someone else to detox. I texted my friend Joe asking his advice, and he said I should 100% go meet up with her. Just needed that justification from a buddy, of course. We made plans to meet up by the little Bayside beach in town at 11 p.m. The Bayside beach in town was the go-to spot for my friend group to hang out or just bring girls on little dates. I pulled up to the nearby parking lot around 10:50 and DM'd her that I was there 5 minutes later. She answered right away, saying, "Great, I left something in the sand for you." Odd. I said, "LOL, what?" She said, "Go look." It was bizarre that we were still DMing on Instagram at this point, but I went along with it. I walked over to the little quiet beach, and I saw something in the sand by the water. It was a little cardboard box. I went to open it, and it was a Polaroid picture of my car, parked in that little parking lot from just now. What the hell? I DM'd her, "LOL, where are you?" She replied, "Come find me." Okay, so she's messing with me or trying to be cute. I could tell based on the picture that she had taken it while hidden in the bush patch surrounding the perimeter of the parking lot. I referred to the picture to get the angle of where the picture was taken right. I walked up to that general area in front of the bushes and stopped. I heard this really weird sound, like the sound you would make if you were trying to gargle but with no water in your mouth. "Tracy?" I said. I parted the bush to try and expose her. Instead, I saw some man hunched over on the dirt below the bush, his back to me. His head shot back at me so suddenly that I fell backwards on my palms, landing on the concrete. I ran to my car and drove out from there. I had to tell Joe and the rest of my friends what happened, and while they still used that beach as a hangout spot, I had to stop going there for a while for my own good.
I know when most people think of a female clown, they immediately think of the charismatic and very sexy Batman villain Harley Quinn, but I promise they're not all like that. Back in 2012, I was walking home one night, at around 9. I live in Gilbert, Arizona, and was walking by a large, wide-open park with a couple of soccer fields and basketball courts when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The overhead lights were still on and illuminating the fields, and I noticed someone sitting cross-legged out on the grass. I pulled out my earbuds and stepped off the sidewalk to get a closer look. At first, I thought maybe it was someone who had hurt themselves, but as I took a few steps closer, I noticed that it was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, leaning forward over something. It was hard to tell her exact age because her face was covered in white makeup, and a red heart and a black spade painted on her cheeks. Her top lip was painted black, and her bottom lip dark red. She was wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up, but had 2 holes cut on either side to accommodate her blonde pigtails. I stopped in my tracks and glanced around, convinced that this was a YouTube prank or something. But we were in the middle of a wide open area, and aside from the occasional car passing by, we seemed completely alone. The clown lady was wearing bright red sneakers, torn jeans, and some kind of clawed glove on her right hand like Freddy Krueger. I was only a dozen feet or so away, close enough to say something, but I decided to back away slowly and not engage in whatever she was doing. As I took a step back, she called out to me without looking up.
"Where are you going? Come here."
"Nah, I'm good," I replied, and continued to walk away. For the first time she looked up, and smiled way too big, showcasing far more teeth and gums than was necessary. She raised the clawed hand, and I noticed that at the ends of each fingertip was a sharp point, like a thumbtack.
"You sure? More for me then."
That's when she pulled out a large kitchen knife, the size of an ear of corn, and started cutting into the thing on the ground. I glanced back down and noticed the thing that she was leaning over appeared to be a dead bird of some kind, and she was using her clawed hand to pull the feathers off. She stabbed at the bird with the blade, and then pulled out a flask out of her pocket and threw back a swig. I nearly fell backwards into the road as I maneuvered myself off the grass and onto the sidewalk. I didn't want to turn my back on her the whole time, convinced that it was a prank, and I should start looking around in every direction for someone with a camera or a phone. But there was no one else even remotely close by, and no place they could be hiding either. I quickly turned around and power walked down the sidewalk towards my apartment complex. As I reached the intersection, I was forced to wait for the traffic light to change, so I could cross safely. My earbuds were back in, but I honestly wasn't listening to the music. I was so confused and unnerved by what I had just seen. I glanced over my shoulder and saw to my horror that the lady clown was walking up the sidewalk towards me, appearing to be looking directly at me. I wrenched out my earbuds again, glanced both ways, up and down the street, and even though the light was still green and the cars had the right-of-way, I sprinted across. When I reached the other side, I turned and saw that she was still approaching the intersection. She waved at me with her clawed hand, and a few feathers fluttered to the ground. She called out to me.
Don't get killed tonight.
At least I'm pretty sure that's what she said. There were sounds of traffic muffling her voice. I literally ran home, entered my gated apartment complex, and went a long way around the building just to make sure I wasn't being followed. I then climbed up the stairs, locked both of my locks, and stared out my peephole in a panic. For about 5 minutes before I finally calmed down, I didn't turn on any lights in the apartment, and instead used my phone to navigate to my bedroom, and then used a light from my laptop screen to change and go to bed. The following day, when the sun was high in the sky, I double-checked the spot where the clown lady had been, and the mutilated remains of a bird were lying on the grass. A few weeks later, I saw her again in broad daylight. I was driving my friend's car and noticed her walking down the sidewalk in full makeup and the exact same hoodie, dragging a garbage bag behind her. I turned the car around out of morbid curiosity and followed her for about a half-mile, pulling over on the side of the road to let her walk ahead for a while and slowly continuing on. When she reached a wide-open plot of dirt, I saw her pull out what looked like to be a dead rat from the garbage bag. She cut it open with a switchblade and wrung it out like a sponge, blood spilling onto the ground, and probably all over her clothes as well. That's when she turned towards me, and with blood running down her fingers, raised her right hand and put her thumb between her index finger and middle finger. This is known as giving someone the fig, and if anything, it's even more obscene than raising your middle finger. I immediately backed the car up and got the hell out of there. It's not that when she turned towards me that bothered me. She easily could have realized that she was being followed. It was the gesture she gave me. It's one I commonly use at people in traffic, and I always get a kick out of it because hardly anyone knows what that means. But I've never seen anyone else use it in my life, and the fact that she did really shook me. I mean, what are the chances she knew that I would understand it? I've since moved, but my buddy still lives out there, and occasionally tells me he spots her wandering the side of the road. So next time you're in Gilbert, keep an eye out.
This is the story about my experience on not the deep web, not the dark web, but rather what is believed to be the Mariana's Web. For those of you who don't know what the Mariana's Web is, it's basically the darkest place on the internet you could possibly go. Many people claim that the Mariana's Web is a myth and that red rooms and torture doesn't exist, but let me tell you that they are completely wrong. I know this because I used to be a hacker on the deep web. In fact, I was so advanced that I could access files and other things not many people could access. I could hack into streetlights, hack people's bank accounts, government files, and much, much more. I knew it was wrong, but back then I thought I was slick and could get away with practically anything as long as I was careful, and I did for a while. It was the summer of 2018, and one night I decided that it was time to see a part of the internet that very few people have ever seen before. I gathered all of the information and steps to get to the Mariana's Web, which I obviously won't explain, but let's just say that it had a lot to do with coding and encrypting files in order to unlock certain places. A lot of people think that it's easy to get on the dark web with just a Tor browser, but it's much harder than you may think. Sooner or later, I was pretty sure I was now on the so-called Mariana's Web. The first things that popped up were of course some drug sites, and sites that sold stolen credit cards and some messed up fetish sites. Thankfully, I had no interest in that stuff, so I didn't bother paying any attention to that. However, a message then popped up at the top right-hand side of my screen. It said the words, "Hello new user, you have an invitation." I was confused and decided to find out more information, so I stupidly clicked on it. There was a blank white screen with only one link. I could tell from the link that it was a video of some type. Now, I wasn't afraid of getting hacked as my computer was very well protected and anybody who dared to hack me would not be successful at all. I thought I was the tough guy and proceeded to click on the link. It took a while to load, but eventually static appeared on my screen along with a frequency type noise coming from my computer. However, a screen appeared on my computer from some sort of video. The quality was very grainy, but I could just make out the footage to be a living room of some type. It was confirmed that it was indeed a video when a door from the room opened. A man with a creepy mask came out and sat down in one of the chairs. He started to introduce himself as Doug and how he was known to murder people. He then started talking about how he plans out who he's going to murder next and how he always get away with it. Like I said, I've been really experienced with the dark web and it's normal to come across stuff like this. Doug then got up and walked into another room bringing out what looked like a folder of some type. He opened it and showed pictures of all the people he had supposedly killed. However, they weren't just photos of the people themselves. It was photos of people murdered, like stabbed and beat. There was one picture he showed where a woman was being run over with what looked like a truck. He mentioned about how he came up with these creative ways of tormenting these people without having to kill them instantly. He wanted their deaths to be long, suffering, and painful. There was a comment section, and I decided to try something I'd never done before. I typed, "You're such a sick person." Doing that was possibly the biggest mistake I've ever made, because not even 3 seconds later my screen became dark and a small chat box appeared. A message appeared inside the box saying that I was stupid for doing that. I thought that maybe it was some sort of bot trying to scare me, but something inside of me told me that this was no bot and that I was talking to an actual person. I typed back saying, "Who is this?" Whoever it was replied saying that he was Doug. I told him that I was going to report him to the police and show them the video. There was a short pause before he typed back saying, "Oh, really? Well, I guess I'm gonna have to kill you, Jacob." In my mind, I of course thought he was joking, but I was dead wrong when he typed my full, complete address. However, the address was only the tip of the iceberg. He started talking about how he knew everyone I knew. My parents, my relatives, my friends, and even my teachers. I was shook, wondering how in the world he knew every person I knew was. He then typed, "I'll see you later." After that, my computer shut off completely and it wouldn't turn back on no matter how many times I tried. I didn't tell my parents as I would get into major trouble, so I decided to keep quiet and let it die. As more time went on, I thought the whole thing was far behind me. However, it wasn't until a few weeks later that I came home one day to my mom questioning me about something. She said while I was at school, a sketchy-looking man came by the house asking for me. My mom, of course, wasn't stupid and claimed that he had the wrong house. She told me that he tried to convince my mom that he needed to come in, but after my mom kept refusing, he eventually gave up. Till this day, I'm convinced that whoever was at my door that day was Doug. This just goes to show you how one little mistake can almost ruin your entire life. I still wonder what would have happened had my mom not been home.
The 80s were a crazy time in my life. I'm not proud to admit that I was a major drug addict back then. I've since reformed and I've turned my life around. I've been sober since 1990. This story was my wake-up call, and the main reason that I left that life behind. Back then, I was working as a window washer in Birmingham, Alabama. I lived in a small apartment just outside the city. In those days, a lot of contraband came through there, and I was kinda sorta friends with my dealer. We'll call him Chris. I've known Chris since high school. He was always a bad seed, and had a criminal record the length of my arm, which is to be expected in this line of business. We had a sort of standoffish relationship. He tried several times to get me to hang out with him at parties, and go to bars and whatnot, but I always declined because I never fully trusted him. However, as my addiction became worse, I began to let my guard down more and more. It was on a Friday night. I remember this clearly because I had just gotten paid. And being the pathetic addict I was, I called up Chris as soon as I cashed my check.
Hello.
Hey, Chris, it's Richie. Are we good for a meetup?
Yeah, I need you to meet me somewhere else tonight.
Why?
Because I don't want to get busted selling this shit to you in the same fucking place over and over again. The police came and knocked on my door this morning, accusing me of slinging dope.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah, and it's a good thing I don't keep my stash in my house, or I would have been fucked. But they are watching me, and I think someone is running their mouth.
Chris, I'd never...
Look, just shut up and drive out to the abandoned church. Be there by 7.
Chris abruptly hung up. The church Chris referred to was located roughly 30 minutes outside the city, towards Kohlberg. I had only been there once back in high school when a mutual friend of ours had a keg party there. I thought he was overly paranoid, wanting to meet me all the way out there, but I had to play by his rules since he was the one with the supply. I made the drive out there and was sitting in my truck outside the abandoned church, which was nothing but a heap of charred remains barely standing. That party I mentioned took place in 1981, so someone took it upon themselves to torch the place since then. This was before cell phones, so I pretty much just sat there and listened to the radio while I waited for Chris to show up. I looked at the clock on my dashboard and saw that almost an hour had gone by since I arrived, and there was still no sign of Chris. It was now dark out as well, which was making me feel uneasy. This church was off of a back road near Interstate 22, which was practically in the middle of nowhere. There were no streetlights or anything out there. It was when I was thinking about how if anyone was outside, the only thing that they would see is my truck's cab light, that I started to feel like a sitting duck. I tried starting up my truck to get out of there, but my dumbass had nearly drained the battery by sitting there with my radio on. As I tried turning the engine over, I got the feeling that eyes were watching me, and I turned on my headlights. I looked up, and a wave of dread overcame me as my headlights illuminated a horrifying sight. Standing in front of my truck were 3 figures. The first thing that my mind was able to register was a pair of antlers on top of a deer head, and for a split second, I thought maybe a trio of deer were standing in front of my truck. But as I looked closer, I saw the figures were standing upright, and I came to the horrifying realization that what I was looking at were 3 men dressed in deer skins. I began to panic and started to turn the key in the ignition. I didn't know who these deer skin wearing freaks were, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. As the sound of the engine failing to start rang out, I watched in terror as the 3 figures began to move closer. "Come on, you piece of shit!" I yelled as I slammed my foot on the gas pedal while continuing to try and start my truck. With each attempt, the headlights flickered, and as the figures slowly closed in, I could see that the middle one was holding a shotgun. I closed my eyes and began to pray for God to help me out of this situation while pressing down on the gas pedal. Suddenly I heard the sound of the engine roaring to life. I didn't have time to be relieved, as I quickly threw the vehicle into reverse and hauled ass. I looked up to see the deer people were much closer than they had been before, but that's not what scared me. What scared me was the shotgun pointed directly at me. Not a second later, I heard a gunshot, and I felt a hard thud as one of my headlights was blown out. I did not stop the truck as I quickly backed out to the back road and then floored it all the way back to town. When I got back home, I immediately called Chris, but there was no answer. The next day I drove out to Chris's trailer and knocked on his door, but no one came. I didn't know what to make of the situation, and I decided to call out of work for a week and lay low. Chris was found 2 weeks later, on the side of a road about 15 miles away from that abandoned church. He had been bludgeoned to death. I came to the police with my story, and told them about what happened to me. But the death of a known drug dealer wasn't exactly a priority for them. They did, however, try to get me to confess to killing Chris multiple times, even after I showed them the damage to my truck. I could see the writing on the wall. The police were too lazy to investigate the case, so they tried to pin it on me, using my drug addiction to support their bullshit theory. They harassed me with parking tickets and stakeouts until I finally moved away a year later. I still have no idea who those dear people were, but I'm convinced that they were the ones who killed Chris. My guess is that Chris got to the church before I did, and they ambushed him. To this day, I'm grateful to be alive. The moral of the story is that you should stay away from drugs. Not only will they destroy your life, but they will also put you into dangerous situations like this one. If I were to give this story a title, I'd call it Scared Straight.
The following story happened when I was 16, and still to this day, I reflect on it from time to time. A bit of background. I live in Australia, and live reasonably close to a Royal National Park, where this story takes place. If you aren't familiar with the park, it is a large area over 100 kilometers in space, with winding roads and nothing but brushland that are quite fun to drive through. On a night like any other, I was doing just that. I was a passenger in my friend Ash's car, and my brother Lucas was with us. It was approximately 1 a.m., and we were driving deeper into the park as we had done hundreds of times before. As we came quickly around a bend in the route, we were face to face with a girl standing at the edge of the road, close to one of those barriers, as we must be near a cliff. She looked to be in her teens. Her age I couldn't be 100% sure. Though this sounds cliché, I swear she was wearing some kind of white dress and was pale-faced. I am an avid horror movie fan, so I understand how this all sounds. Her immediate appearance wasn't what was concerning to us. We had stopped virtually in the middle of the road, and the car's headlights were shining directly on her. We became uneasy when the girl did not blink, flinch, or move a muscle, despite facing us directly. I remember wondering why she would be out here standing in the pitch-black night. I can't remember if my brother or our friend suggested it, but someone said, "Should we go see if she needs help?" In that moment, so many questions were racing through my mind. I think I was the first to speak and said no, firmly. As much as I wanted to help someone, I reasoned with the boys, saying that if she was in trouble and needed help, she would have indicated it by now. I also suggested that it could be some kind of trap used to distract us, and someone could be nearby to attack us if we aided her. After what felt like hours, though really, it was only a minute, we got the hell out of there. We had to drive past her to continue our route, and couldn't do a U-turn or a three-point turn, because the road was too narrow. As we drove past her, I was in the back seat and turned my head to watch her. I still get chills when I think about this, but that girl's head turned slowly in sync with the car's movements and watched us drive away. I kept my eyes on her, and still she did not blink or move as the light around her started to dim until she was in the darkness once again, and I could no longer see her face. Oddly enough, the three of us didn't mention it the next day or for a very long time. At least I don't remember having a conversation about it with Lucas. It was only a few years later, when I had started to question if I had dreamed it, when I asked my brother and our friend if they remembered that night. To my horror, and somewhat relief, they did. They recalled the details as I had recalled them, so I knew it was real. Over the years I have wondered what became of her. I regret not going to the police, and you may ask why I would even go to the police if she had done nothing wrong. Truth be told, there are no residents that deep in the park, and she was a good hour's walk or so from the nearest highway. I have gone back to the park several times since, specifically to try to find the girl or see if there would be a common occurrence. I have researched online for any clues as to who she might have been. On one drive when I was searching, I said to a friend of mine, Nick, who was happy to come along, that there could be bodies in the brush, and no one would know. A week after I said this, the dead body of a man was found a few feet away from the road in the brush by a motorist who had stopped to relieve himself. It was in the news, and it makes me wonder, how many people are out there in that park? But most of all, who was that girl that we saw that night?
My first job was at McDonald's. This building was attached to a gas station and located off of a busy highway. I was 16 and started a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. This early, the store was usually empty, so only 3 people, myself included, were in the restaurant. These people were my manager, who was in the back, the cook, who was also in the back, and myself, the cashier, who was up front. I was wiping down the counter when a man who looked to be in his mid-30s or early 40s came in. He didn't order anything, but went straight to the restrooms, which were in the restaurant area just around the corner from my cash register. Many truckers and travelers would come in simply to use the washrooms and leave, so this was not an uncommon occurrence. I didn't think much of it, but after the man finished, he came up to the counter and said, "Excuse me, I just used the washroom, and one of the toilets is overflowing." I immediately came around the counter and let him lead me towards the restrooms. Suddenly, I got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and stopped dead in my tracks. I became very aware that no one was in the restaurant area, and the only other 2 people in the store were in the back and wouldn't be able to hear me if I went into the restroom. I felt this overwhelming sense of being lured in. The man had the restroom door open and realized I had paused. He said, "Come on in, I'll show you," which came off innocently enough, but it didn't sit well with me. I smiled and said, "I'll get my manager," and I started making my way back to the counter. "It'll only take a minute," he called out. I met my manager in the back and explained to him that a man was complaining about an overflowing toilet. My manager went to check it out, and I followed closely behind him. When we turned the corner, the man was gone, and we entered the restroom. No toilet was overflowing. We exchanged a look and never brought it up again. As we were leaving the washroom, I glanced into the parking lot, and I saw a car driving away. It was the man. He gave me a terrifying death stare as I drove off. To this day, I don't know what gave me that feeling to not follow the man into the restroom, but I'm glad I stopped to think about what I was doing. The whole situation only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I was young and trusting, and this man could have done who knows what, and I wouldn't have been hurt. He could have left, got away with whatever it was he had planned, and hit the highway.
I'm 22 years old, and this happened about 2 years ago when I was still living at my grandparents' house. This was the only scary experience that has ever happened to me, and it was a doozy. My cell phone was on the nightstand next to my bed and started ringing. It was like 3 a.m. To my surprise, the number calling me was the house phone, as in the phone downstairs. I answered, thinking that maybe one of my grandparents had hurt themselves, but when I said hello, I got no response. I again said, "Hello, Grandma, Grandpa," but again, nothing. That's when fear really hit me. I crept down the stairs, and they were really old stairs. They creaked. The whole house was dark, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't petrified of what I would find. The house phone that called me was in the kitchen, and as I reached the bottom step, I was still holding my cell phone to my ear, and whoever was on the other line was still there. I could hear them breathing lightly. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, my heart beating out of my chest. I switched on the light, and to my relief, nobody was standing there. But at the same time I realized that they must be somewhere else in the house. Or maybe the phone somehow malfunctioned and called the last number dialed or something? No, it was someone in my house. How did I know? Because suddenly they started laughing through the phone. I could tell it was a woman. It was my grandma. I ran upstairs to my grandparents' room, and it was locked. I could hear my grandma hysterically laughing through the bedroom door and through the phone. Panic hit me. I kicked the door open and immediately saw my grandpa shaking my grandma as she sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone in her hand and laughing maniacally. I have never in my life seen or heard my grandma laugh like that, but it was horror movie material. She abruptly then stopped as she woke up. Both of my grandparents completely brushed it off and told me to go back to bed. But it was so insanely scary that I almost wanted to scream at them. The next morning was like any other. My grandma made me pancakes, and when I asked her about the sleepwalking or whatever she was doing the night before, she just casually said, "It happens once in a blue moon." I told her what happened exactly, beat by beat, and she responded, "Oh my, that sounds so scary." Yes, Grandma, that's a freaking understatement.
So, basically, my boyfriend and I live in a flat together, and he's an area manager for a main chain restaurant in England. His job takes him to at least 5 to 8 stores, and sometimes he has to stay late. Sometimes he doesn't get in until around 3 a.m, so I usually sort of wait up for him to make sure he's alright, if he wants me to run him a hot bath, and if he wants a coffee or anything. So, I get the usual phone call from him saying, "I'm on my way home. I'll be home in an hour. If I drop call you when I'm closer, can you get a bath running for me, please?" I say sure and hang up. Now, our block of flats has this security door that always gets locked at 10 p.m, and as long as you have a main entry key, you're free to come and go without worrying about the door. I'm nestling down to watch some Netflix, with a cup of tea and a cheeky biscuit, when I hear our buzzer to our flat go off. Now, someone outside the main entrance is pressing my number, and I have to press a switch from the inside of my flat that will open the main security door and let them in. I think to myself, it's probably just someone who's forgotten their key and pressed my number quickly. I try to shrug it off. I pause the film I'm watching, and I wait. The buzzer rings again, stops, and then rings again. It sounds like someone is deliberately putting their finger on it and holding it down. Now, our flat is on the second floor, and from our bedroom, we can look down and see who's at the main gate. I jump up, go into the room, and slowly peek to see who's there. I saw 5 well-built, stocky men. This is 2 a.m. What the hell are they doing here? Why the hell are they ringing my buzzer? It suddenly becomes clear to me that whoever they were, they clearly didn't live here, because they didn't have a key. While peeking at them, I clearly see the front guy put his hand up and press my buzzer. Flat number 4. He's not even touching the other buttons, just mine. Half of me wants to pick up my flat phone and be like, "Seriously, get lost. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I will call the police." And then the other half of me doesn't want to give away that I'm a girl. It sounds silly, but I'm 23 and I'm quite small. I grab my phone and I ring my boyfriend straight away. He says something like he's 45 minutes away and will be there as soon as possible, but he will call his dad, Luke, who's a policeman, to come over and wait with me. While I'm on the phone, the buzzer is still going. He tells me to just keep peeking at them and to see if I can make out any distinguishing features. After what seemed like ages, my boyfriend's dad turns up, and I see him walk straight up to the guys and start a conversation. My boyfriend's dad already has a security key. We gave him one in case we were ever locked out, and he opens up the door to my flat. Straight away, he runs over to me and makes sure I'm fine. We're sitting down, having a cup of tea, and I ask him what was said and what was happening outside. He says he walked up to the main door, and the conversation went like this. They said to him, "Hey man, do you live here? Do you think you could let us in?" Luke replied with, "Well, clearly if you don't have a key, you don't live here, so no. Who are you supposed to be seeing?" "Well, my main girl lives in number 4, and she's gone to sleep. You know how late it is. These are my friends, and they don't have anywhere to stay, and I haven't got a key. So, how about you let us in?" "That's funny, because my daughter lives there." "Oh yeah? Shit, dude. Well, how about letting us in, and we can go and see her together?" Luke said, "Right. Now I don't know what you're planning to do, but seriously, stay the fuck away from these flats. You clearly don't live here. If you ever come here again, I will personally arrest each and every one of you wankers. Now fuck off and go home, because I swear to God I will beat the shit out of you guys so bad, no one will recognize you." And with that, the group of guys took off, and Luke managed to open the door freely and get in.
This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor. Stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. One night, I woke up at around 1 o'clock in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I awoke from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way up, and a few seconds later, steam was rising, and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head, and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it close behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw that the knife was missing, and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat, and was evicted after not paying rent. It seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place.
For some context, I'm a 19-year-old female, and I just moved out of state and had just started my first semester in college. I didn't live on campus, as it basically costed a fortune, so I had to live with my parents until I could afford to move out. One day over the weekend, my parents had left the house for a 3-day vacation, so I had the house to myself. Being only 19 and easily getting bored, there weren't too many things that I could occupy myself with. So I call up my friend who lives just around the corner from me and invite her over to watch some Netflix as we had recently got it. She agreed and came over to my house, and we both sat on the couch and watched a movie. About an hour into the movie we were watching, my friend grabs the remote and pauses the movie, saying, "Liz, do you hear that?" It was very faint, but I could just make out a sort of slight metal banging coming from my backyard. I live by a wooded area, so there are a bunch of unwanted critters that look around my backyard. However, the noise sounded as if it were in a pattern. It's the same bang and scraping noise repeated over and over again, and I felt sick to my stomach. Being a very paranoid person who watches too many horror movies, I grabbed my brother's baseball bat from his room while I opened the back door. It was practically pitch black outside, so I couldn't see as to what was making the noise. At first, I thought that it could have been a rat or even a squirrel. But when I turned on the outside light, all of my thoughts as to what it could be quickly vanished. The outside light revealed a man hitting my AC condenser with one of my dad's gardening tools. He was super thin, maybe about 5'8", and he looked like he hadn't seen anyone in years. I lost it and ran back inside, telling my friend that we had to leave through the front, and that's exactly what we did. We ran out of that house so fast and got into my car while my friend was on the phone with the police. All the while, I had been crying my eyes out until we stopped at a nearby gas station so I could calm down. As far as I know, whoever was in my yard that night was gone. The police searched the area, but there was no sign of the person that matched my description. Later, the police told me some very disturbing news. They said that, as they were looking around my house, they saw that the door to my garage was wide open and broken down.
This happened to me about 15 years ago. I lived near the ocean, and I frequented a certain spot on the beach all the time. It was a lonely spot, and not many people ever really showed up there. This one Saturday afternoon, I was laying out in the sand in my spot, relaxing and tanning like I always did. It's not uncommon for me to fall asleep. I did sometimes if the sun wasn't too hot on my skin. This one particular day, I did. I woke up a while later to the sun now setting, and realized I had slept for quite a while. I looked to my left, and saw a woman sitting near me, in the sand, but not on a towel. She was wearing jean shorts and a bathing suit top, and she had really pretty red hair. At first, I didn't really acknowledge her, but after glancing at her a few times, I noticed that she was just staring out into the ocean, and didn't turn to look at me, or anything for that matter. I felt a bit of curiosity, and said hello to her. She said hello right back, without turning her head to look at me. Right after that, she sprung to her feet and walked away. I thought that was weird, but didn't think anything really of it. About 30 minutes later, I packed up my stuff and left. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I had a great day relaxing at the beach like I always did. Once I was home, I started making myself dinner. I heard my phone ring and walked over to my purse on the counter and pulled it out. It was my mom, and we started talking about the usual things, when I noticed a square folded piece of paper sticking out in my purse in the midst of our conversation. My mom continued talking, and I pulled it out and unfolded it, confused, because I was pretty sure I didn't put it there. I literally dropped the phone when I read what was written. It was a note, and it said, "I was going to rob you and stab you in the throat, but you just looked so peaceful." I picked up the phone and told my mom what happened, remembering that girl on the beach. We both nearly passed out.
This happened to me a few years ago when I was 25 years old, and this is by far one of the scariest and unexplained encounters I've ever had. It is absolutely true, and it's something that I just had to share. I live in a terrace house, which is basically multiple houses combined together, forming that of an apartment. It's not the best place to live in, but my parents wanted me to move out, and this was one of the only few locations that I could afford monthly rent. I live in Los Angeles, so it's expensive as hell, and without a lot of money, you're basically either struggling financially or living on the streets. Anyway, I had just gotten home from work after a long day's shift and needed time to myself. Being the big couch potato I was, I threw myself onto my couch and watched some Netflix with my cat until my fiancé got home. I have a peach-colored American short-haired cat named Gus, and he's actually my emotional support animal to help me cope with my anxiety. So I'm sitting there, watching Orange is the New Black with my cat, when he suddenly starts meowing repeatedly. Even though it's something all cats tend to do, I found the behavior very strange, as my cat never meows unless he wants food. But seeing as he was already fed not too long ago, it didn't make any sense. All of a sudden, his meowing turned into high-pitched hissing while arching his back. The hair on his back also began to stick up. At this point, I didn't know how he had gotten so scared. And that's when I realized that he was looking at the bathroom door in the hallway. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach as I realized something must have startled him. The door to the bathroom was shut, but I quietly tiptoed over to the door and put my ear to it. And that's when I heard it. A loud bang hit the door, and I grabbed Gus and took him outside of my apartment down to the lobby. At first, I figured that my boyfriend was messing with me in the worst way possible, but he had claimed that he was still at work when I called him. With no other option, I call police and they have 2 cars over within 5 minutes. 2 of the officers questioned me, while the other 2 went to go check in my apartment. When they got back, they had some very odd news to share with me. They had gone up to my room and searched my entire apartment, but didn't find anyone. This was technically impossible, as I had locked the front door when I heard the noise, so whoever was there couldn't have left. I don't know if it was an intruder or something paranormal, but I knew that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me as my cat had gotten startled. One thing I do know is that I wasn't alone in my apartment building that evening.